All right, we're coming to you with a very special live stream later on in this week. I know we already technically did the podcast of the week with the Better Call Saul live stream earlier this week. That was a lot of fun. Thanks to everyone who showed up for that. But Kristen and I, when we were talking before this, we realized that not only do we share the same birthday, which is crazy, the fact that we went like a year without even knowing that, but also we found out that we were both really, really looking forward to a certain movie with the word bodies, as you guys can see in the title, coming from our mutual favorite studio, A24. And now we're here to talk about the aptly titled Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Kristen, do you have anything to say about this before we get started?
I am very excited to talk about it because, first of all, it's A24, baby. You can't go wrong with A24.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. All of that and more tonight's episode of the Talkin TV podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to a special bonus episode of the Talkin TV podcast. I haven't done one of these in a while. You know, Chris and I we attempted to do like a lot of bonus stuff. We were experimenting around during last summer before that kind of ultimately went the way of the dodo, like a lot of other things we were doing on this channel. But Kristen, I'm so happy to have you here. Like I said, it turns out that among the many other interests that we share, we also share a birthday, which is crazy. So I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday, actually.
And happy birthday to you, too.
Thank you. Yes, we're both officially middle-aged, you know. I believe that's the term that the kids use now as far as describing people who have officially in their mid-20s. I just turned 25, which I'm still trying to process that. What's it called? You, and obviously you're older than me, so you just turned.
Yeah, I just turned 27.
27. Wow, 2 years older than me. I keep forgetting that. Yeah, it's crazy. But I mean, I feel like we're the perfect. I feel like that works perfectly for what we're about to discuss here, because we're about to discuss a horror movie that was just released by A24 that, again, literally seems to have been made not only for us, but about us. I mean, I hope not us specifically, but like just when I say us, I mean the Gen Z generation, you know, that referring to all of the kids born between the years of 1995 and I believe 2005, 6 is the cutoff, I want to say, for Gen Z. I don't remember when Gen Alpha begins. I'm never really good at keeping up with that.
I would say 2000, maybe 6.
Yeah, rough. But that's what I would say about that as well. You know, basically the generation where our entire lives have basically been consumed by social media. We are the oldest ones, and we still barely remember the time like before the social media age. Like we still remember like when our parents had Blackberries and stuff like that, and like we were around for like the first iPod and stuff. But for the most part, our entire lives have just been like, we've never known a time really before the existence of the internet and online just kind of interaction and chats and everything, you know? So that's kind of, I feel like, what people refer to, because that's something that even really millennials who kind of like were referred to as like, you know, the first problematic generation, they still like pretty much experienced the time before the internet that we kind of really have never known. Mm-hmm. And so it brings us into this movie that both of us have really been looking forward to. It's obviously, again, there's just a ton of stuff that finally made this movie feel like the perfect mainstream marketable movie for A24. You know, it's confined in one setting. It's got a bunch of young, up and coming, very attractive looking movie stars. It's a horror slasher. You know, it's a paranoid mystery thriller. There's a little bit of a whodunit mix in. It's like it's like these movies that we used to get all the time, where it's like, I like to call this the perfect date movie. You know, where a lot of guys can just take like their date on it. They're gonna have a great time. You know, they're gonna be constantly guessing as far as trying to figure out what it is that's going on. So in order to kick this off, Chris, I wanted to ask, like, when did you first hear about this movie, and like kind of what was your anticipation level going into it, as far as like, you know, just in general?
Okay, I first heard about this movie right after I saw Shiva Baby, which was almost about a year ago, because I became a fan of Rachel Sennott, who is, I believe I'm saying her name correctly,
but Sennott, I think
Sennott,
something along those lines.
And I was obsessed with her and her performance in that, and I was like, I got to check out this girl more. Heard she was coming out, and then in this movie with Bodies, 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 I was like, all right. When I was doing the research for it, it just seemed like very hard, because the first still image that came released to the public, it was just like her and the rest of the cast covered in blood. And I was like, oh, this means it's going to be a horror movie. I'm in, regardless who's in it. I love horror. And it's A24. I was like, I got to see it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because, again, we talk about the idea of like how the movie stars officially almost kind of died with the internet age. But I mean, you see the cast that they lined up. It's like all people who have like either like right on the verge of becoming famous or have like just broken out. You're like, oh man, Amanda Stenberg, Mayala Harald, Maria
Mhm.
Bakalova, Pete Davidson, Lee Pace. You're like, what? The dude from
Yeah.
Guardians of the Galaxy is in it. It's like you're like, what is happening? But it's very strange where it's like, wow, this was, I gotta say, this is the first movie in a long time that I per se was actually really looking forward to just based off the cast alone. And then that trailer comes out, and oh man, can we just say right now, easily one of the best trailers for anything that's come out this year. The way they're playing the Charlie XCX song, the
I
way
love
it's
that
edited
song.
together,
I think
it's
that
great.
song is a bop.
The way they edit it together, the way that like kind of all they're using all of the what's the word, all the trigger phrases, you know, it's like, oh yeah, it's like you're I can't even remember. There's so many name of it. It's like you're it's like you're gaslighting me, and like all like the different like the click phrases, the clickbait that everyone loves to throw around nowadays. And I'm like, okay, this is just like, I'm like, I already can tell that this is a movie that even if it's not that good, I'm at the very least going to have a blast with. Like I said, A24, for the most part, has had a pretty exceptional track record, obviously, since their inception in 2013. They took a little bit of a hit, obviously, during the pandemic age, during the 2 years of the pandemic. But I'd say it's safe to say that with films like, you know, obviously the one that we discussed, Men, one of our favorite movies this year, X, Everything Everywhere All at Once, a couple others that have come out that like they've definitely made a comeback, and they've got a lot of really interesting ones coming out later this year. And so I go into this movie, I watch it. Certain parts are, I gotta bring up again our colleague Luke of Luke Reviews saying the trailer did this movie very dirty, but the high praise led me to watch it. The parts of the trailer, those parts of the trailer really turn me off, but it does work brilliantly in the context of the film. And Luke, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it was those parts of the trailer that got me suckered in, because I could immediately tell, I'm like, oh, this is not going to be a movie that's embellishing those tropes. This is a movie that is going to be this is the type of movie that is going to be ripping these characters a new one by using those types of phrases. And walking out of the movie, I can say that there were parts of this movie that were exactly what I was expecting. There were parts of this movie that were completely not at all what I was expecting. But Kristen, after watching it, what were just your first thoughts when you came out after watching it?
I was very surprised. I didn't love it, and I also didn't hate it, because I feel like this movie is going to be very mixed with audiences and what it is, because it's basically a satire film. So I was very surprised. I thought going into this with the marketing for it, they set this up as like a horror slasher whodunit, and I was like going in already thinking like, oh, who's going to be the killer? And I was questioning throughout the entire time, but then I was like, there's a lot of unexpected events that happen, and I love the way they play around with its messaging and its focus on what its target audience is, and I think they really excelled at, and most of the performances are outstanding, especially from Maria Bakalova, who just is not, I don't think is getting talked about enough for this film.
It's kind of interesting. Yeah, I think mostly because she underplays it. She's very much so like kind of the low-key, like silent savior of the film. You know, like I said, she doesn't have a lot of lines in the movie. Everybody else is given a lot more grandiose and showy performances. Like I said, she's surrounded by a ton of people who are just mugging for every scene. Like I said, it's really awesome to actually, like I said, there's a reason why I'm talking about the cast of this movie so much, because it's the first movie in a long time where it's like, wow, we got a lot of actors for this movie, and we actually let them riff, and they all get their moment to kind of shine, which is something that, again, because every movie now is just so telegraphed and choreographed out beforehand that everything most of the time feels so artificial. It's like, it's very rare that we get a movie that feels as naturalistic as this. So my whole thing with this movie going into it beforehand is I was expecting like just like a rip-roaring, again, there's always going to be some level of instance in where the trailer kind of does the movie dirty, but I was just expecting like this rip-roaring, absolutely farcical blast where the characters are just making fun of each other and being total hypocrites nonstop before doing the next thing, where it's like, oh, you're judging me, and then does the exact same thing that they're judging them for and everything. And I was definitely surprised when the movie still had those moments for sure, but I guess I just wasn't expecting like how they were gonna pull off the commentary aspect, because as I'm sure a lot of you have come to realize, the commentary aspect is pretty fairly heavy in this movie, as far as kind of the idea of, like I said, we're going to talk about kind of this movie and how it's been compared to Scream a lot, but I understand where the comparisons are coming from, as far as where people are saying, oh, this is very much kind of the slasher movie that feels like for Gen Z, in the similar way that Scream was for Gen X. But the difference, for me at least, was that Scream was very much so about a type of storytelling structure
Yeah.
versus a specific generation, which is why I think Scream ages a lot better versus this movie. It's like, I don't know if this is going to be something that like people look back on in 20 years and are like, oh yeah, that ages really well. It's got a lot of really pressing themes.
That's the one thing I was thinking about when I was driving home with my sister and we were talking about this, and I was like, I don't like particularly like see this film like being recommended or talked about 5 years to come. The only thing that'll probably get talked about are most of the performances, but I don't think it's going to age as well because I feel like we're going so fast with technology, and that's what this film heavily focuses on. And I think it's going to become so outdated because a lot of films out now, I feel like, that involve technology, they haven't aged well.
Right. There comes to be a reliance on, and like I said, it's a problem that comes in with a lot of movies that deal with this type of stuff. You know, we talk about a lot of the movies that were done via like entirely shot through FaceTime. You know, the Unfriended movies, and then that John Cho movie that came out, Searching, I think is what it was called, or that came out a couple years ago. You know, it's always inevitable because.
And there's a great one I'll recommend to audiences that Jason Bateman is in. If you guys want to check out a great Jason Bateman movie, it's called Disconnect. It's got Alexander Skarsgård in it, and it's like got like all technology involved. And actually, just thinking about it, it's almost been released 10 years ago. So if you want to see a good Jason Bateman movie that involves technology, check that out.
Oh wow, I haven't heard about that one. I'll have to check that out.
It's a little indie film.
Oh, no, well, hey, those are always the best, you know? And like I said, it always sucks because the technology forms such a crucial part of the storytelling as obviously we see in the movie, but it's like in 5 years, like what exactly is going to be the new technology that comes to replace it? Of course, Luke always coming to play. How did their batteries last so long?
Yeah!
Last time?
Yeah, Maria must have the best phone in the entire planet. Like, it's so indestructible because that girl just goes through twists and tumbles. She goes in the pool at one point with the phone strapped around her.
It's crazy because, like, the power is off in the mansion for the whole movie. So it's like, what were their phones on 100% that we know they've been using them the entire time? You know, they're never not on them.
They had all those chargers, they
must have had the portable batteries that we didn't see because it was so dark. That must have been what it was. Yeah. So, kind of in order to transition into kind of what the movie's about, I guess we should probably give them some sense. So the movie centers around, I don't even remember any of their characters' names. So the movie centers around Amanda Stenberg and Maria Bakalova, who are portraying the characters of Sophie and B, who are in a loving relationship. They have just recently formed, B is Russian, and she is, from Eastern Europe. And basically, she's traveling with Sophie to what's called a hurricane party owned by a friend of hers, David, who is portrayed by Pete Davidson. Some of the other guests there include, besides obviously Pete Davidson's David, include Rachel Seno's Alice, Myla Herald from Industry's Jordan, Chase Sue Wonders as Emma, David's girlfriend, and Lee Pace from Guardians of the Galaxy and Pushing Daisies as Greg, Alice's significantly older boyfriend. And once the hurricane actually sets in, the power goes out. And once they decide to start playing a game called Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I forget exactly what the actual rules of the game are, but essentially what they have to do is they have to separate and pretend to all be dead. And the whole thing is that one of them is the murderer, and they have to like basically, it's basically like I don't even know how to explain it. It's basically like Manhunt, but essentially but in like a confined setting where they're having to like run from this one person and figure out who is the killer. It's like Manhunt mixed with Clue almost. Is the best way that I can describe it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, actually.
Yeah. And then of course things start to go topsy-turvy. One of their friends ends up dead, and the thing turns into an actual case of murder mystery where they're trying to find out who or what is taking them all down as the night goes on. And like I said, there's a lot of twists, there's a lot of turns, there's a lot of revelations. And in order to kind of like essentially break down like kind of where the interest comes from, what I'll say is that the interest of the tension comes from the fact that, if we can get a little bit into spoiler territory now, it very much comes from the fact that about halfway through the movie, you start to wonder if there actually is a killer. And about half, because at the beginning of the movie, they're so convinced that somebody is actually out there. They're like, oh shit, somebody killed them, you know? And because there's like other people in the house that are unaccounted for, they are constantly talking about this one guy who was at the party earlier, but then left because of an argument with Pete Davidson's character. And so, but about at the halfway point, once, let's say, certain bodies have hit the ground, they start to realize that, okay, there might not, at least I would say we as the audience start to wonder, is there actually a killer here? And so kind of that push-pull back and forth between that kind of paranoia that is, of course, issued by their just growing tensions and growing kind of problems that each of the friends are having with each other. It just kind of amplifies the situation. So it creates this really interesting push-pull back and forth that I was not expecting, where they are all, and this is again kind of why I bring it back to the idea of it being exclusively made for Gen Zers, because it's one of those instances where it's almost using the inherent artifice that comes with growing up at the technology age, as a lot of us have done. We talk all the time where, again, it's like, we have, I feel like we are the generation that it's said to like have the least amount of actual genuine connections and friendships with people, but because of how plugged in we are with everything else, we can just see, we feel like we know like thousands upon thousands of people better than some of their actual closest friends, which is kind of a crazy new phenomenon, but this is the first movie that I've seen in a while that I think actually plays around with that in a really interesting and different way, and actually utilizes that towards the story, and probably one of the best ways I've seen really in any movie recently. I don't know, what's your take on that?
No, you said that really perfectly. And let's see, how can I build off of that? I'm just trying to think how I can build off of that. I think the one great thing with the technology aspects is like how they were able to get everything precise with the TikTok culture, with the buzzword culture, and I want to say with the casting, I think that's a big thing for this film, especially with Pete Davidson, since he's like the internet star boy, who I like to see him as. And something I was like thinking about it when I was like driving home on Tuesday from seeing the movie. I was like, I wonder if they hired Maria Bakalova because of all the controversial stuff that she did with Borat, because she got a lot of attention from that and online publicity for that. So it does a really great job on figuring out like the star power for this film and what made everybody like a perfect candidate for their roles. And
the star power aspect is definitely a big part of that. Obviously, again, like I said, they were very, very particular with the cast in there. Again, the Pete Davidson thing, obviously just coming off of the whole Kim Kanye thing and all that, and how he kind of unintentionally shot up to being one of the most famous people online. After it was almost kind of because of who he was dating. It really wasn't about him at first. It mostly just kind of became like internet gossip. It's like, oh, he's with Ariana Grande. Oh, he's with Jessica Biel. Oh,
he's with Margaret Qualley.
He's with Kim Kardashian. It's like, oh man, and what's it called? And Luke's still firing it with the one-liners. The movie's accomplishing what it set out to do, when Pete Davidson ends up being the most sane character in the movie.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we'll come back to that for sure, because I don't necessarily know if I buy into that entirely. I guess the point being is that there's a lot of what feeds into the paranoia as well is that there's a lot of speculation, and there's a lot of stuff that feels like about the characters that we are deliberately not being told. Like, there's a lot of stuff about Amanda Stenberg's character that we are deliberately not being told. Maria Bakalova, it seems like, it's got this whole backstory where about at a certain point in the movie, I was wondering, I'm like, okay, is she just a sleeper agent that's been sent in order to like kind of like instigate this stuff as part of like a mind game in order to like kind of what triggers? Like, I was going there. Mayala Harald, and specifically the way that she was acting throughout the whole movie, like when she saw her getting the gun, I'm like, okay, the movie did a really good job as far as making me like suspect each and every single one of them, with a few exceptions, obviously, and obviously, I think they did that really interestingly with Lee Pace, but obviously, they kind of got that out of the way early on. Yeah. So I guess if we can start to dive into spoilers here. So
let's spoil.
The inciting incident, let's call it, if you will, obviously once the hurricane sets in, once they start playing bodies, it is revealed they notice Pete Davidson and his throat's been slashed at the beginning of the movie, and they're like, oh shit. Like, what's going on? And they immediately run in and they're looking over him and they're like, oh no, what's going on? And the only one that's not there is Lee Pace's character. So then they're like,
supposedly like sleeping.
He's supposedly sleeping, doing like some crazy respiratory respiratory therapy, something like that. And like, we got to take 10 minutes or like 15 minutes just to talk about Lee Pace here and his involvement in this movie, because I mean, I'm still processing it, where I'm like, here's the thing about Lee Pace. Lee Pace is the dude who is kind of known as being like, for lack of a better word, what I like to call the slightly more mature / smarmier version of Tom Hiddleston, where this guy, I feel like his first big claim to fame really came in one of the many shows that was canceled from Brian Fuller, the creator of American Gods. It was the show on ABC called Pushing Daisies, wherein Lee Pace finds himself having the ability to resurrect dead bodies. And so naturally he ends up helping out the police with it, because that was just the time period when everything kind of low-key got turned into a procedural. And obviously I feel like his big claim to fame as far as modern audiences being aware of him came for when he was cast as the villain Ronan in the first Guardians of the Galaxy, and he plays a role not exactly like that, but very similar to that in this Apple TV Plus show that I was watching last year called Foundation, where, again, he's known for being very regal, very brooding. You know that he's British. He's always got that air of superiority, of smarminess. And so you can imagine my surprise when I see him there, it pop up in this movie, and he's just kind of like this chilled back, relaxed, hippie-like dude.
Yeah,
who's doing
he's
all this crazy
very,
stuff.
very hippie, and
He's jacked. He's dating a girl like at least 2 decades younger than him, and I'm just trying to process this, just and like being like, what the hell is going on? But like the way they set up his character, like, even though after a certain point you realize you're like, oh no, he just was harmless. He's just like kind of a hippie and probably a little crazy for probably having done a little bit too many hallucinogenic drugs. I think they do a great job as far as setting up like how they could be suspicious entirely from the girl's standpoint, you know?
Yeah, it makes sense. So they do a good job like reasoning with that. And I'm like, okay, wait. For him to be killed off so early, I was like, no,
Right.
wait, this can't be it. This can't be it.
Right, exactly. Like I said, it's one of those things where and this is a thing that I think works well for the movie while you're watching it, but it's one of those things where in hindsight, like once people start to go back and rewatch this movie, if they rewatch this movie, it'll be one of those things where it's like, oh, it kind of becomes a little bit more of a flaw as time goes on, where the movie has these moments where they are very specifically and deliberately placing these things to act as bait and switches in order to continue the tension. And it works really well in the moment where you're like, oh, I don't know what this character's doing. Oh, I don't know the motivation. Oh shit, what's going on
They
here?
said this, they said that, they're going over there, and this person did this
something's
with the
not
past.
right here. It's all dark. I don't know what's going on. This person's got this unknown backstory that I don't really know about. And it works really well in the moment as far as furthering the tension, keeping and continuing to heighten the paranoia. But on hindsight, once you realize what has actually caused all of this, you realize you're like, oh, okay, that was just there to kind of trick us, you know? And it's like, that's constantly kind of the problem, I feel like, when it comes to these types of movies, is there's always going to be some level of trickery involved in movies. That's the magic of movie making. But I feel like the problem comes from when audiences realize they've been tricked as part of it for the story. That's when they start to become a little bit unsatisfied, you know? Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to drive a lot of the movie away. I mean, can we say now what happens to Pete?
Not yet, because I want to save it because I want to get to like a little bit more. So basically, so they kill Lee Pace. The rest of the movie, they're trying to figure out what's going on. There's more and more revelations that are revealed. It turns out Maria Bakalova didn't actually go to the school where they thought that she went to. Amanda Stenberg previously had a relationship, or maybe had a relationship with Pete Davidson's girlfriend. An affair, which is not really well explained. And then she found dead shortly thereafter, which shifts the blame to Amanda Stenberg. Myala Herald is seen getting a gun randomly, and they're like, okay, is it you? And she's just acting really rash and really kind of suspicious of, like, very obviously so. And then she's like, no, I'm just naturally frightened, you know? Like, I love Myala Herald. I think she's absolutely fantastic in industry. But I will say, if there was one bit of casting where it's like, I felt like she was just playing a little bit too obvious and a little bit too on the nose, I would definitely say that it was her. And there's obviously, again, there's like I said, they do the Pavlov's gun thing. There's a gunfight. Couple more of them end up dying. There's one really particularly awesome sequence where they end up throwing a girl off a balcony. And like I said,
that was nuts.
It's crazy. Like I said, it really does lead to some awesome action set pieces and some really crazy awesome stuff. I will say, though, too, just another quick side note, with the whole coming back to the bit of Rachel Senow being a podcaster and her whole spiel where she was talking about, it's really hard being a podcaster. You have to book the guests. You have to send.
I was like, that's the most relatable part.
I felt personally attacked. I was just sitting there in the theater looking around, and I'm like, oh man, they're coming for me. They're gonna catch my ass. I better go. You know. And so that was great. So it finally ends. Amanda Stenberg and Maria Bakalova are the only ones left standing. And like I said, the cream of the crop is they're all struggling around because the last thing that Maria Bakalova is told before the person dies, I'm just saying, before Myala Herald dies, is check her text, you know, because it's like, and she's looking for the phone. They find a phone. It's not hers. It's Pete Davidson's phone. And it turns out that the inciting thing that started all of this is, so at the beginning of the movie, Lee Pace is shown using a special type of a knife. I believe it's called it's called a kukri, is what it's called.
It's a kukri?
It's called a kukri. It's a type of machete originating from India, traditionally associated with Nepali-speaking Gurkhas of Nepal, known for its obviously distinct curve. He's shown slicing off a bottle of the top of a bottle of champagne with it. And it's revealed at the end that this moron, Pete Davidson, tried mimicking the move for a TikTok video and ends up cutting his own throat. Which is why, and
which is
shortly
like
thereafter is when
insanely. Like, I was laughing and I was like, what? I was like screaming in the theater and just laughing my butt off. I'm like, what an idiot.
This is so unbelievably, insanely stupid, but so brilliant, because there is no other way that this could have ended. And also, what a perfect thing in order to catapult this just crazy night of paranoia and skepticism, that it literally comes from a dude trying to make a TikTok video. Like, if that doesn't sum up our generation in a nutshell, then I don't know what does. And that's the part of the movie that I thought really hit well and was really, really effective, as far as just like, yeah, we will literally devolve into mindless savages over something. It's not even over something like actually important, like, oh no, we're going to run out of food or anything. Just something as stupid and as trivial as just trying to get attention from people, you know? And I feel like that kind of ultimately symbolizes the core of this movie, because as far as like the rest of the cast goes, like I said, there's just a lot of tension kind of circling around about whether these people are actually friends. You know, I've been to a decent amount of gatherings, like, you know, not exactly like to this extent, but like similar to this, and just the types of people that you find yourself around, you know, the super fake, super happy,
like superficial,
personas.
maybe
All
some
of the
narcissist
superficial
behavior.
personas, and people are, and I'm just like, none of these people are real, and I don't believe for a second that any of these people are actually friends. And that
and you could tell they never really cared about each other, because they all came from like a privileged sense, and that's what the movie also delivers in a great sense, is the entitlement and privilege over one person has. Maria Bakalova is the only one who's like seems very down to earth on this.
Right, which is why she is also relatable. But I will say, I think they do a good job with Amanda Stenberg as well. Amanda Stenberg in particular is somebody who I've been following for a decent amount of time, you know, kind of tracking her as she's gotten older. You know, I first noticed her, she played Rue, the little girl that died in the first Hunger Games film, and then she famously had that movie, The Hate You Give, that came out a couple years ago. And now she's in this, you know, she's kind of all grown up, basically. And I think they did a pretty good job as far as like making me relate to her, where is in the sense of they draw you in by making you think that she's gonna be like kind of this superficial, just like kind of manipulative, needs to be the center of attention person, and then how she didn't exactly end up being that, and more so ended up being like this person who almost like has to put on this facade in order to kind of maintain her role within this social hierarchy of friends. I actually found that pretty interesting and compelling. Obviously, you know, the whole thing with Rachel Seno and Maria and Mayala Herald is like, and this comes from another problem that I had with Mayala Herald, where Mayala Herald, you don't really know anything about her character. You don't really understand how she fits into this dynamic group of friends. You know, everybody else's kind of backstories and connections.
And everybody has like a love interest going on. She's just the loner, like in the corner, like, hey.
Right, and so you almost get the sense that like maybe she's got this chip on her shoulder as far as maybe feeling never one with the group. So her kind of role is to just like make everyone else feel shitty about themselves. And that's kind of what, and that's literally the only role that she ends up playing ultimately. You know, like I said, Rachel Seno, who is kind of only there to be like the joke character of the group, where she's the butt of everywhere. She starts off as like kind of being like the most superficial and having the most amount of artifice, you know, constantly talking about the podcast and everything. And throughout the movie, like kind of as her artifice is more so stripped away as time goes on, and you realize that like, nah, she's the most insecure. She's the one that definitely feels the least confident in herself. And but I did kind of legitimately feel bad for everyone like calling her out for like just kind of how fake she is, where it's like it's one of those really weird phenomena where it's like, I shouldn't like it. That always happens, where it's like, I don't like this person up until they get called out for their BS, and then you're like, oh,
and
now
then
I
you feel for them because you know
why is that?
Wants to get trashed on.
Why does that happen? Like, why do we end up feeling bad for them? You're like, yeah, you're finally getting your just desserts. You're finally getting called out on. Why do I feel bad for you now?
Yeah, you shouldn't be.
Is it just a public setting? Like, what am I missing here?
Is it now the question of, okay, do we root for the bad guys now?
Right. Yeah. Which, I mean, is fair, because it's like, again, I would argue that no character in this movie, maybe with the exception of Maria Bakalova, is really like likable or in anything or in any way, like I said. And that kind of brings me into my next point, which is like kind of the inherent quote unquote likability of characters, because I feel like A24, this kind of goes into the A24 mantra, where A24's that kind of modus operandi has really been about characters that are kind of inherently unlikable. You know, go all the way back to James Franco,
Mm-hmm.
and Spring Breakers, and Miles Teller's character in Spectacular Now, who, well, for a pretty likable and interesting and charming character, but like he's an alcoholic and stuff like that. So like they've never had a character that doesn't have some form of baggage weighing them down.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the first instance where I've seen where they're like, no, we're not trying to make these characters. We are just making these characters as straight up unlikable and as fake
This
and superficial and shallow as humanly possible. And we're almost going to test you as far as seeing how long you can stick with it, you know?
this also goes back to one of our favorite performances, Dom, Simon Rex in Red Rocket.
Exactly. Yep. Now we're talking. That's 100% right. Could not agree more. You're absolutely right. The whole interest with that movie was the fact of we are watching a character who is super narcissistic, super full of themselves, and is doing some absolutely despicable, heinous deeds, but it's the fact that he's not that aware of just how despicable it is, or maybe he is to some extent, but it's kind of like that inherent not knowing that just makes you super interested in following him. You know, like I said, it's what A24 I think is really, really specialized in, and what's made them kind of the dominant powerhouse in kind of what's left as far as like the non-commercial aspect of commercialized filmmaking, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of my next point that I wanted to bring up. So is this the defining slasher for Gen Z? You know, which I think is a little bit of a loaded question because the horror genre has changed so radically since kind of, you know, like kind of the new age obviously said. I feel like the shift really came in like 2016, 2017 when Don't Breathe and Get Out and Blumhouse really started to make its way onto the scene, because I feel like what's been so interesting about horror movies specifically of the last couple of years is that a lot of them have been soft reboots and soft remakes. You know, the Halloween movies, you know, M. Night Shyamalan kind of making a resurgence, but it's been very rare that we've seen like a whole lot of like truly original ideas that feel original. You know, like I feel like with the exception of Jordan Peele, a lot of them, they still play around with a lot of the familiar horror structures and tropes that we know. And so kind of my thought process on this comes from the fact that, okay, this is still a traditionalist structure that we know of, but what they're ultimately playing around with and what they're trying to say, I think is really interesting and new and unique. It's something that I don't really think has been seen and been done before, you know?
No, you make a great point. And I feel like, if anything, this goes back to, I guess, the most recent thing I think that does better is the new Scream movie.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I haven't seen it, so you would have to.
You haven't seen it, you gotta watch it. Oh my god.
Yeah, and I haven't famously. I have not seen any of the Scream sequels except for the aside from the first one. I was planning on doing a big Scream binge for this year for my Halloween binge.
Oh my gosh. If I wasn't on my laptop right now, I would have shut the computer and be like, Dom, you gotta go watch them. Forget bodies.
I will say though, I have not heard good things about Scream 3. I've heard that
Scream 3 is like good. We don't talk about that.
That's the one that nobody talks about. Yeah, I was doing a little bit of reading on as far as like some of the stuff that happens in that, and I'm like, yeah, it's stupid. Like, I'm sorry, that's really dumb. But like, I love Laurie Metcalf, but I'm like, yeah, this is really, really, really stupid. But I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on this as far as like kind of, is this the defining slasher / horror movie or no? This is ultimately kind of become like a blinker miss and like works more of like as an art house film more than a horror movie.
Oh, it's definitely an art house film in that realm of A24. It wants what it wanted to achieve and do, and it does that effectively. However, it is not. What was that? What was the last part of that question? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's not like it's more of like an art house film rather than a slasher.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. It's more of that than it is an actual slasher film. It has all those slasher moments, but it's not ultimately defined by that. It's mostly the whodunit aspects of it. Right. But this is more of an art house film. I can tell from all the details that it wanted to do, and it achieves that.
Which I will say too as well, that I think this movie very deliberately sets a lot of scenes up like there's gonna be a jump scare and then just doesn't. Which I love when movies do that now, because it's not that I hate jump scares. I hate how frequently they're used and how misused they are. Where jump
Yeah,
scares
that
have
was the
become
problem such a long time ago. Now
right.
now people are understanding like, okay, the effectiveness of a jump scare.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you still see them, like there was so much of them in It Chapter 2 to a point where it
Mhm.
almost became comedic. And like a part of that was it was supposed to be comedic, but I'm like, okay, like I get this. I don't really
Mhm.
care anymore. This is not going anywhere. And but I can always appreciate when a movie is like setting up for a jump scare and then just nothing happens. There are so many stretches of the movie where you just see this character completely wandering around in the dark, and us as being trained horror movie watchers, our brains are already getting us ready for like, oh man, when's the thing gonna come around from behind the corner and like jump on them, or when's the fake out coming? Like we're trained for it. And so that when that never happens, I think it's really, really ingenious kind of how they pull
Mhm.
that off. Like I really, that was something I really, really appreciated. But yeah, I agree with you as far as it's like, I definitely think this is gonna work much more so as an art house commentary. I think it's just the horror artifice that it has is what's going to draw people in. And I will say,
Mhm.
I was expecting to watch this in another empty theater, like a majority of the movies that I've watched in the last couple of months that have not been Marvel movies. Almost a full house. Almost a full house.
Oh, that's good.
Now, granted, it wasn't my Regal theater, so there's still going to be a ton of seats that weren't filled up. But I was shocked by how many people are actually going. So I'm like, okay, so teens will still like go out on dates
I
to watch
think it's
horror
that
movies. That's
Pete
good to know.
Davidson marketing nowadays. I think given
Yeah.
with the recent situation, people want that people's all eyes are on Pete Davidson nowadays.
Yeah,
And
that's fair. That's completely fair. So, yeah. So, another thing. So, what's it called? Did you have like a standout cast member per se? Because there was one moment where like I was bouncing back and forth. I'm like,
oh,
I like
definitely
her. I like
Rachel.
her. Yeah, Rachel and
Definitely
Amanda
Rachel.
for me.
Rachel is the scene stealer given her character. Like, like she's gonna be like on the opposite end of something like there's that scene where she's gonna talk about her podcasting and then she's like, oh yeah, I'm an ally and stuff like that. Like she's like like she's trying to make sure she's on the right side of
Right.
things.
Exactly.
So
More of the Gen Z artifice. If it's like, oh, I have to prove that I'm a good person by always talking about these things that I'm just so in favor of all of these just causes, like, oh, like save the puppies and all like, well, I'm
save
just
the
making stuff,
puppies.
I'm making stuff up, but like, you know what I'm trying to say as far as it's like
Yeah.
all of the different like righteous causes that people say they're a part of. When it's like, well, us as like commonsensical people, no, it's like, yeah, guess what? The whole thing of it's like, it always goes back to that old school thing of like, you trying to convince us more and more of you being a good person is making us believe that you're a good less and less that you are actually a good person, you know? And so I thought that was kind of hilarious how they played around with that. And I mean, so Rachel, obviously, she was the standout. Like I said, Amanda Stenberg was surprised, really, really surprised by her. Really, really enjoyed her. Like I said, I love Mayala Herald. I think she's fantastic on Industry. I still think, though, that like there was a couple of things that needed to be rewritten. Lee Pace, just
Lee
like I
Pace is
said,
another great one. Just wish we had more of him, but
wish we had more of him. Like I don't know, like what did you think of like like that whole sequence of it in and of itself? How they're playing around with that, like because I mean, like I said, the problem is that there's so much as far as little as they do tell us in order to like let us fill in the dots. I still don't think it was enough, and I feel like there could have been like so much more, just like something. You know, like I said, they were playing around. There was some hilarious bits where they thought he was a vet. They're like, wait, did you say he was a vet? They're like, yeah. Did you say he was a vet? I'm like, and then she's like, he was a veterinarian, which
yeah.
Dying laughing at that line.
Yeah, that part was really, really funny. And then he's got like all this stuff that involves him and the hippiness that we were talking about earlier. It's his character's great. And
yeah. I just how Pete Davidson just hates him for no reason. Just like out of
he just
nowhere.
does not like him.
Because
all the girls are so into him.
All
and
the girls are
fascinated
super into him.
by him.
Well, he's older, he's super hot, and he's chill, you know, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But here's the one thing that was kind of confusing because they didn't really allude to this, but like, are Pete Davidson and Rachel Seno supposed to be brother and sister? Like, did they ever say that or no?
I don't think so. I don't
I
remember
feel like it's heavily alluded to, but I don't know if they ever actually explicitly say it. But like, there are multiple things to hint to the fact that it's like, yeah, they are brother and sister.
You know?
I
don't remember that being brother and sister, but
yeah, I don't know.
I wouldn't be able to tell you
because I don't remember. Only because I couldn't think of another reason because Pete Davidson they need to obviously have Pete Davidson hate Lee Pace in order to set up for when he dies. It's like, oh, so Lee Pace is the one that killed him, you know, when he was just like blatantly screwing around with him for no reason to the point where like they got really up close and personal in their face. But like, it still kind of came out of nowhere. And I'm like, there needs to be some sort of establishment. And unless I missed something, like,
yeah,
I don't know. And like when Amanda Stenberg is talking with Pete Davidson about kind of like the arguments and all the stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of unresolved tension going into this, but I don't know. Those are just the parts of the movie that I'm like, again, in hindsight, I wish they could have better explained.
Yeah, they could have just tweaked some stuff and then that would have really made this movie like really stand out. But it's better than I thought it was going to be.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I agree.
I was pleased with
Yeah, the
mostly what I
last
saw.
Yeah, the last thing that I really want to talk about before we get out of here is what's it called? Kind of the humor in the movie. Where I will say that kind of I understand what Luke is saying as far as where the trailer he thinks did this movie very dirty. Where the trailer makes, like I said, it makes this movie look like it's going to be a lot more farcical than it actually is. And what this movie ends up being is it ends up being brilliant satire while not necessarily being farcical. And I talked a lot about the differences between the two. Sorry, getting a little film schooly on here, but essentially the difference comes to that satire usually plays it very, very seriously and lets the situation speak the humor versus farce is usually very on the nose. It's very obvious that they're not taking it seriously. It's obvious that it's a joke. Other terms that are usually used for farce include spoof, parody. Basically, think of anything related to Mel Brooks. That's usually what people think of when it comes to that sort of stuff. So I guess just that, like, this movie not really being as funny as the
No, it's
trailers
not really
marketed
that
it out. Like,
funny.
and don't get
No.
me wrong, like there are still funny lines, but it's much more so utilized like within context in order to get like there's a lot more drama than I was expecting going in. And like I said, the moment, the humorous moments do come from, like I said, moments like the ending, the lines, when the revelations come out about the inherent shallowness of the characters. Certain characters will say something that's meant to be like this really supposedly like emotional thing, and other characters will just roll their eyes. Those are the moments that are just drop dead, like rolling around on the floor, hilarious. But like, I don't know, how do you think this is? Only because I bring this up because my friend Dustin, the Duster Mason, who's been on this, brought this up, which I think is a really interesting point. Where he's like, I felt like the movie almost was like pulling this bait and switch as far as like it could have almost been funnier. So my question is, it's like, did this movie work as far as with how it utilized the comedy with the drama?
Yeah, no. Well, actually, no.
not very convincing there.
Yeah, no. I wasn't laughing as much because even though you can tell they were really pushing some elements for that, I think most of it works when it comes to the oh gosh, now I can't even think of the other word. Body humor, like,
Right.
with the pushing around and everything like that, and getting all crazy with the gun situation, and just
Right.
having it, everything's like spirals out of control, and then you sit there and you laugh for yourself what's going on because of all that built drama. There's more drama in that than there is comedy.
Right. It's certainly an instance of where like those situations in a completely different director could be played out as much more farcical and much more so for laughs. And then, oh no, a gun goes off. Oh no, someone's dead. And then that could have been like a really like an interesting twist as far as like setting up, no, things are serious now. But I think they do a really good job as far as like with how they set up that there's some form of like a lot of intermittent drama that's been happening with this group of friends kind of off the screen that now is going to be dealt with in this movie that helps to set up and allows for the comedic moments to be much more so fewer and far between, But with that being said, I still think they do a great job of it. But yeah, I will say that this movie is not nearly as funny as the trailers make it out to be. The trailers make this out like it's going to be like a straight up comedy, and it is to a certain extent, but it is much more so, I would say, a black comedy than a comedy, if anything else. Much more so like Fargo than anything else. So with that being said, want to get into final thoughts and star ratings?
Oh yeah, let's get into star ratings. Let's see. I'm gonna give it the same score I gave like Bullet Train because there was a lot of fun. Just if it really tweaks himself, this would have been an A film for me. But I'm gonna give it a B, 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, well, we always know that I always typically go easier on movies when they have flaws, depending on how much of a good time I have. And like I said, it's this kind of eternal thing that I learned from the rewatchables, where perfect movies don't make rewatchable movies, like which I think is something, though those are kind of words that I've kind of taken to heart, where my whole stance when it comes to grading flaws within movies is that I will usually almost always give a movie that has some flaws a pass as long as they can make it work for the most part for the story and still turn out a very entertaining and engaging product, which this movie did in spades. So I definitely think that this accomplished that for sure. The best that it possibly could. And so I'm going to give this, for me, this is a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I had an absolute blast watching this movie. I had so much fun. The ending was great. I put this actually in my top 5 movies of the year. Will it stay there? We will have yet to see. But for sure, I had an absolute blast with this movie. Could not recommend it. I will definitely say that this is a movie to watch if you want to, like I said, have a really great date movie, have a really fun time just watching a great stance at a theater. It's probably, I don't know, would you say this is the most mainstream movie that A24 has ever done?
No, recently with The X, I think.
X. I would agree more. I would definitely agree that X is much more so mainstream. Yeah, that's one where it's like, yeah, that one just really kind of came and went to the point where
that one I just love.
They're even turning out a
Pearl.
prequel for the movie later on in the year, which is like so Ty West definitely just shot both those movies like at once, right? Like
yeah, he shot them all at once,
right?
and like he did X, and then right away he did Pearl.
Right.
And
I'm still convinced too that just like with how low budget both of those movies are, and like with how limited the location, I'm still convinced that he shot them both at the same time. So
he did.
And like I said, X was like such a perfect like bow tie on everything one and done that I'll be interested to see like what he's able to do with Pearl. You know,
me too. I'm very excited to see that one
and engaged in that. But Kristen, thank you once again for joining me. This was an absolute blast. So happy to have you back on. As far as like I said, we did Men earlier this year. We missed our chance with Everything Everywhere All at Once, but we'll definitely try and hit like kind of all of the other A24 movies that are coming out for the year. You know, like I said, Chris and I, we did our favorite A24 movies at the beginning of 2020 before the world went to hell. And so I definitely would like to bring that back at a certain point. So before we get out of here, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
The good people can follow me just about anywhere. I'm on Instagram at Miss Filmingo. That's my title right there. And I'm on Twitter at KFilmingo, and I write for a couple different websites. And yeah, it's pretty simple. I also host a podcast. And you were on an episode.
I was.
That's finally
indeed.
out.
It's finally out. Be honest. How long did it take you to edit that episode?
Oh, Mac. Here's the thing. I host the show with my friend Mac, and Mac and I go back and forth editing. And with the time that you were on with John Burns, the episode was over 3 hours. And at the meantime, Mac got COVID and went on vacation. And
So that would explain the delay. But hey, at the very least, you had the time in order to edit it, you know?
Yeah, at least I wasn't the one editing it. Next time I'm editing.
Absolutely, yeah. So with that being said, of course, you can follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin TV podcast across all platforms. Subscribe to us if you're listening to us. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a follow on Twitch. New episodes of the Talkin TV podcast are released every single Monday and Friday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We're almost done with our Talkin' Thrones recap rewatch series. Season 7 episode 4 comes out tomorrow at this time. Yeah, it's crazy. I still can't believe it. Right in time for the House of the Dragon premiere. And with that being said, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.